Ben was the type of person that wouldn't tell you his life story. He's not gonna sit you down and explain, I'm Ben Oki, and this is what I've been through. But I think Ben has had a pretty complex life.
He was born here in Sacramento and then moved to Japan as a kid. And he was actually in Japan during World War II, and he lived in Hiroshima.
He had ditched school with his buddy to go fishing, and the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. He heard the explosion. He was not present in the city when it happened, and obviously they realized the aftermath of that when they tried to go home and there was no home anymore. That is my understanding, and from what I gathered from Ben, I asked him kind of loosely about it one time, and he said, yeah, there's something like that. Being in the United States, obviously the whole World War II internment camp experience, you saw a lot of Japanese Americans cling to the pieces of culture that allowed them to identifiably be Japanese, and bonsai was one of those things. Now, Ben, he's the first apprentice to John Naka, who is largely regarded as a very significant pioneer of bonsai in the Western world, expanding the art form to Europe, expanding it to Australia, expanding it to Africa. John Naka had a big influence in North America, and Ben Oki too became one of these pioneers that spread kind of the word of bonsai, made it accessible, had students, had a prominent impact on the North American continent with bonsai's growth, evolution, and the distribution of it to any gender, any ethnicity. I think Ben was a very significant ambassador to bonsai in the world. As a result of that, over the course of his career, you have the Ben Oki Award, which is BCI, Bonsai Clubs International Award, given to a deserving tree for outstanding work performed. You have the Ben Oki facility at the Huntington Library and Gardens, where he was the curator of the Golden State Bonsai Federation Collection South. And now you have the Ben Oki Scholarship Foundation, which is funding and supporting the continued education of people that are really trying to raise their level in bonsai. And it feels fitting for Ben to have that kind of long-standing commemoration of his contribution to bonsai. My original mentor was Harold Sasaki in Denver, and when I was 12, I started studying with Harold. As I was getting to a point of graduating high school, I told Harold, I don't know what to do about college. My parents want me to go. I'm gonna study horticulture. And he said, you should really try to be as close to Los Angeles as you can, and you should go seek out Ted Mattson and Ben Oki. So when I got to college in San Luis Obispo, I called Ben Oki on the phone. I've never met him. He had no idea who I was. I called him on his home phone. I asked him if I could come down and study. He invited me to come down to the Huntington. I met him at the Huntington and worked just me and Ben for a whole day on the landscape at the Huntington. And that kind of started my relationship with Ben. Without knowing me, he invited me to come down, and over the course of time spent together, he started inviting me to his backyard to work on his own trees, and started opening up a little bit to me in a more personal manner. And eventually he just said, hey, if you want to study bonsai with the kind of passion that you're showing me, coming down to LA, being in college, doing everything you're doing, I'll take you to Japan and I'll introduce you to Mr. Kimura. And that was really sort of that moment where it was like, okay, this is what's gonna happen. In 2002, Ben took me to Japan. We went to Mr. Kimura's garden, and Ben put his reputation on the line and recommended me to Mr. Kimura, and that probably was the biggest component of securing my apprenticeship with Mr. Kimura, was Ben Oki's recommendation. So when I got back on the bus after he recommended me to Mr. Kimura, I didn't understand the Japanese language exchange that they had when he communicated to Mr. Kimura I wanted to apprentice. He got on the bus and he said, I think it's okay, you should write him a letter. That was it. So I went home and I wrote him a letter, and then I wrote him another one and another one. I continued to go and spend time with Ben down in Los Angeles. So I basically just followed sort of what Ben had laid out for me in terms of the steps to success, to securing an apprenticeship. And again, I think his vouching for me was as big as anything. When you start an apprenticeship in Japan, you don't know if you're accepted or not, because there's kind of a 3-month washout period where you get put through, it's almost like a boot camp for the military, at least in Mr. Kimura's facility. There's a 3-month trial period. And I had no idea if I was going to be able to continue studying with Mr. Kimura, because my 3 months was coming to an end at the point where tour groups were starting to come for the exhibitions in the fall. And Ben Oki's tour group came to Mr. Kimura's garden. Ben asked Mr. Kimura how I had been doing, and Mr. Kimura said, "Good, we're going to the consulate tomorrow to secure his visa." And that was the first time that I knew that I had actually been accepted as an apprentice, when Ben Oki came back to the garden to see me after the first 3 months. That was pretty special. And he was super happy and I think very proud, and that made me feel really good. Bob Pressler approached me about this project and he said, "Listen, the California Bonsai Society is trying to increase the opportunity for people to study bonsai and offering scholarships to fund their bonsai education. And we have this tree from this unique scenario that worked out in the Southern California region. It's an old Ben Oki tree that he collected and he initially styled. Would you be interested in potentially working on this tree and playing a role in it facilitating this scholarship opportunity for people?"
My original thought was just to sell it and use the money for the scholarship fund. But then, I started thinking, I know Ryan has a special relationship with Ben. So I called Ryan and I said, "Hey, this is the situation." I told him we had this tree and he was like, "Yes, I'm on. What do you want me to do? I'm on board."
It only seemed fitting, based on the doors that he had opened for me, to be able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, to lend my skills to take this very historic tree with provenance and sustainably do the work on this tree to make it the very best it could be, to fund something that carries on Ben's tradition of spreading the love of bonsai. And so I was in. From day one, I was in.
Can you just hold this right here? Just let me kind of actually fold.
I had no idea what the tree looked like. Bob Pressler drove the tree up from Los Angeles, and when he dropped it off, it was immediately apparent that this is a very, very special tree. And we had to reconsider the planting angle. We found a very beautiful Sarah Rayner container to allow us to maximize the deadwood dynamic and hang it off of the edge of the container. The fact that we had a Sarah Rayner container that's the perfect color, the perfect shape, the perfect texture for this tree to exist in, it wasn't sourced for the tree, but it existed and it called out, "I'm ready and I'm the one for this tree," was really special because Sarah too, an American artist who has had a significant impact on the bonsai world with her ceramics.
1, 2, 3. Okay.
With the deadwood hanging off of the edge of the container, all of a sudden you have this dynamic that's created in the deadwood that reduces some of its physical mass in terms of its presence on the soil line. And then we had to go through that process of reconceptualizing the canopy shape to maximize that new design. But over the course of this tree's working at Mirai, the tree kind of guided the entire process. The general feeling that I got working on the Ben Oki tree was just great ease, tremendous ease. Nothing was hard, nothing was difficult, nothing was risky. It just felt like the tree wanted to be what it was.
Okay, ready?
To a large degree, going to Japan with Ben and spending time with Ben at the Huntington and coming back and going down to thank him for everything he had done for me, all of it felt so organic and just a part of our relationship that we had. This tree almost for me was a perpetuation of my relationship with Ben, and I think this tree is a perpetuation of what Ben contributed to the bonsai community. The big question in the design of the branches was, which direction is the apex going to move? Are we going to create a dynamic design where the apex moves to the right? Because the defining branch was preordained, right? It's this lowest branch that occupies the negative space created by the arc of that big fin of deadwood. So we know it's going to move to the left. Is the apex going to engage with that in a tension-filled design, or is the apex going to move away from that defining branch and create dynamic? The apex naturally just wanted to work with that defining branch. We didn't need to add any more. The tree has enough. And so moving the apex in the direction of the defining branch to keep the design as simple and streamlined and put the focus on the material itself that had been collected 40 years ago made the most sense, and absolutely, I think, executed the best aesthetic, which was to let the material guide the process and take the maximum credit for all of its quality and beauty. It was something that Ben created and set the path for, if you will, and all we had to do was just interpret it and continue to follow his lead through the project. It felt incredibly free and natural, and it felt almost like the tree made itself. This is a California juniper that comes from the original area in Jawbone Canyon in the Mojave Desert, where the very best California junipers came from and are no longer in existence. You have a very solid, massive, bulky, characteristic deadwood of California junipers with no termite damage, which means that it's extremely old. It has that characteristic California juniper fin that everybody prizes them for. It's got a really beautiful, tight, compact foliage because it's a female variety of California juniper. And the movement that occurs in the branches and the living tissue in conjunction with that blade of deadwood make it incredibly engaging to look at. Coming back from Japan, wanting to see the bonsai community expand and evolve and wanting to provide the opportunities to people that I didn't have that forced me to go to Japan is what birthed Mirai. The garden, the facility, and now Mirai Live, the online platform that spreads this educational knowledge. And I think when you talk about the definition of Mirai being the future, talking about this unobtainable future that's always out there on the horizon, the way that we invest in the future of bonsai and our bonsai culture in North America as a facility and as an ethos of Mirai is to continue to offer as much help and assistance as we can in providing educational knowledge, but also facilitating educational opportunities. And this scholarship, giving resources to people to be able to pursue bonsai study, what could be better for the future of our bonsai culture in North America than playing a part in the younger generation having the opportunity to seek that knowledge? Within North America, we have a bonsai community culture. One of the things that we've lacked in that culture is the generational handing down of these trees.
In terms of American bonsai history, between Ryan styling it and Sarah's pot and Ben collecting it, trees like that in Japan where you can kind of follow those kind of steps, and not so many here.
So I invite everybody to participate in the sustainable contribution to bonsai education through this project, but also I really welcome the continuing collaboration with whoever takes on this tree to try and ensure that this tree has a long life, longevity, and a continued history in American bonsai, because I think it's very, very special. Whether you choose to bid on the tree or whether you choose to just donate to the scholarship fund because you find it powerful and meaningful, either way that you contribute is absolutely brilliant. Follow the link in the description to engage with the auction and contribute to this fund that has such a significant capacity to impact our bonsai community. We look forward to seeing all of you participate, contribute, and help us continue to expand educational opportunities and the perpetuation of our bonsai history via this special project between the California Bonsai Society and Bonsai Mirai.